and welcome to episode 76 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is January 20th, and together with Goran and Robert, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Today, I'm happy to welcome a guest that joined us last year several times, actually, Philipp Leitenbauer. Last year, he introduced us to some cool check tools for HANA and Linux that he also made available on GitHub. And today he's back to talk about a new quality check tool or some scripts. But before we hand over to him, let's take a look at some of the news from this week. And I want to start with a Microsoft Datacenter tour. We talked about this in the past again, but I still find it extremely fascinating, especially since we don't have a way to visit them on site at the moment. These virtual data tours are also really, really fascinating. And the speakers, Mark O'Neill and also Gerard van der Berg, I had the pleasure to meet Gerard once on site there. He's really making this in a fantastic way. So I'm sure this will be, again, a really cool session to take a virtual tour in the Microsoft data centers. Another thing, Bartosz Czajkowski, after releasing all his OData and Synapse blog posts, he has created a new blog post, again on the SAP community side, and this time around Azure Machine Learning. And what I especially like, he basically starts artificial intelligence, machine learning is really interesting, but he's not yet used this really, and so he's really starting from scratch. He talks about some scenarios that inspired him, and then he really walks us through a full setup, like what is machine learning, then where do you get the data from, and then he makes an analysis on all of this. And yeah, I mean, you've probably seen several blog posts from Bartosz already, so it's again very detailed, and the end with a beautiful Power BI dashboards where he then can actually take some results or lessons out of the data that he put into the machine learning algorithms. So I think really a very interesting blog post from Bartosz again. Check it out. Then another thing, Goran, that we found on the tech community about SAP application servers in an active-passive deployment across availability zones. Goran, do you want to share some insights there?
I like actually the blog and the idea. It's actually about the automation, right? So in a scenario where you go across the zones, they could be more far away, meaning the latency would be higher. So then what could happen that, in one zone, there will be a database and central services and also all the application server. Application server in another zone will be shut down because latency is too big, and that would decrease the performance, so to say, if you would run against the app servers in the secondary zone. Now, what happened is that sometimes there's even maybe unplanned downtime or even planned downtime of the database, for example, and that would mean that the admin should recognize such an event, start the application server in now a new zone, new active zone, zone 2, and stop it in the first zone, right, to prevent any performance issue. And this is basically what he's automating here. So in a way, he would pull up the get the event that there is a database failure through the also SAP on Azure monitoring, and based on those events, he would also then he would use my kind of automation, what I was doing for start and stop of the system, but there is a piece doing the application server. So he would start the app servers on the another side using the Azure automation account, and also stopped on the old zone. So in a sense, it is a nice scenario, which is, I would say, also valuable. I have some customer who actually didn't have a problem with the zones because he was running in a very close to zones, but he has some crazy bad jobs doing select star from the universe, selecting a huge amount of data. And Philip knows this, and even a small and they didn't want, it's a custom-based job, and they didn't want, of course, to change it, right? Although it could be very much optimized. So they were looking at an infrastructure solution, and the solution was basically to run those bad jobs on the application server in the same zone where the active database is. And this extremely small latency difference between the zones played actually, in this case, a huge difference for the bad jobs. So they also had a question, okay, what happens if database fails on another side? How we can somehow automate also the app server to be started on another side and stopped on the first side. So that could be also used in this case. So I like the idea. Yeah. So customer.
I mean, what I liked very much when reading through this is how all these different pieces that we now have are coming really together. As you said, there is the start-stop framework that you had released some time ago, but then also really leveraging the functionalities from Azure Monitor for SAP.
Exactly.
So really getting the information here with the pacemaker agent. So now we can see something has happened, and then we use this information. We just trigger another script from the framework here, and this is really, I think we had a few sessions, obviously, yeah, about Azure Monitor, and we were just saying, well, now we can monitor this and that, and we have the information now, and with this, we can actually take actions, and that's what I really like about this blog post, because it really shows one of the first things how you can easily just take the sensor information that we have now and do some actions around this.
Sure.
Yeah, and just think of the idea of, for example, leveraging a function to run an ABAP code in the backend that changes the logon group or changes the batch group. So even if customers are running it active, the idea behind the blog post is basically, if you go one step further, you can go to the SAP system and update it and say, okay, if it's running here, then this application servers should be used for batch group, or the other ones should be used. So if the database fails over, everything inside SAP also switches.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Okay, switching over to load balancers.
General availability of one PowerShell script, basically, which upgrades a basic load balancer to the standard one. It was already there. I know it. I need it for some different reasons. Actually, it's not upgrading. It's deleting the old one and creating a new one based on the same parameters, so to say. But generally, I would say in the SAP context, the standard load balancer are having really much bigger performance, better way to do troubleshooting, and also what is very useful if customer would decide to move from to the zones. In the zones, you need a standard load balancer. So if you have a basic one and availability set, you would need to do an upgrade to the standard load balancer before you move to the zone. So definitely one useful piece for the SAP scenario as well.
PowerShell script then, okay.
Yeah, right. So if we go to the next one, for me, so I love the Ultra storage. I don't know, they rock. I mean, they really have good performance. I love them, you know. I mean, they were missing some features like snapshot, which are kind of now coming, but I really like them, you know. So interesting, I just saw a kind of announcement in new regions availability. So you see SAP HANA is also, of course, yeah, labeled there. Yeah. I love them. They're really, they never let me down, you know. I get high throughput, whatever you like, you know, they just work, yeah, somehow.
Perfect.
The only limit here is the virtual machine, which creates a kind of cap on the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Last but not least.
Exactly. So I found also some interesting virtual, Microsoft Azure Virtual Training Day. So basically, it's a list of the different trainings. So here is the fundamental series. Interesting. It's free. And also, if you complete it, you will get a voucher for free certification of Azure fundamentals. But if you would go also a bit, I believe up, they are different as well. So it's not just a fundamental. Let me see, or down now here in the middle. Exactly. Yes. So there is a different one for I don't know, maybe a Linux, that would be interesting in the infrastructure space, about the architecture, data and DevOps as well. So again, I think would be definitely useful for you guys to check it there. It's free, so why not to use it?
Exactly. Cool, perfect. So this time it was a quick round, a quick overview, but that's actually good because then we can give Philipp a little more time. So Philipp, as always, can you quickly introduce yourself, and then we're looking forward to seeing your cool scripts.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Philipp, based in Austria. So we are now all in the same time zone. I'm part of Vinita Anand's team. So within the SAP on Azure area, I am the incubation and innovation lead for specialized workloads, responsible for SAP on Azure, HPC, and Azure VMware Solutions. So yeah, I've been with Microsoft for 4.5 years roundabout now. And yeah, great to be back on this amazing blog.
We missed you.
Just send an invite. Yeah. So as Holger already mentioned, Quality Check is something that we started some 1.5 years back, especially for HANA workloads. The reason for it was that it was sometimes hard to get, for example, storage configuration right. So we really started with this, hey, does the customer really have the right configuration for premium or ultra storage in place? Did he forget about right accelerator and so on? The next step was where we said, okay, we see that sometimes customers have problems getting their pacemaker clusters right. So for HANA. So we said, okay, let's build all these pacemaker parameters as well and add them to the quality check. And we received really good feedback from partners, SAP, and our customers. And yeah, some months back, we said, okay, how can we improve it by adding more checks? And what we did is we basically said, okay, let's create a new version. Let's revamp everything a little bit, and let's build Quality Check V2. And Quality Check V2 can not only handle HANA now, but he also checks Oracle, DB2, and ASE. We're working on Windows and SQL Server integration, and the biggest change is we can actually check app servers and ASCS instances as well. That means if you, for example, take your OS parameters for fast failover in ASCS failover scenarios, when you, for example, do maintenance, then getting the application server parameters right was always important, and it is important on Azure as well. So now it's super easy to check, for example, an app server, an ASCS, or a database server. And we also added new capabilities like, for example, you can run it now on Linux. In the past, it was only possible to run Quality Check on Windows as a jump post, or you can also run it on Mac. So PowerShell 7.1, 7.2 are all available on Windows, Linux, and Mac. And as the PowerShell modules are independent to the operating system, you can basically do whatever you want. And in this case, run it from different source jump boxes. And one of the and the last really big change was the output. So in the past, we had a text output, not very nice to read. And I was a little bit inspired by HANA Minicheck tool, where you get this nice HTML report. So I'm like, okay, let's basically take that layout and add the SAP info and Azure information to it. And yeah, here we are. It's Quality Check V2. We merged it into our public GitHub repo in the first week of January. And I want to show you a live demo right now. So here's a sample report. Let's increase the size a little bit. So as you can see, it's an HTML file where you start with your script parameters. Then you have some information collection, like what is your VM, what is your operating system, what is the availability set or the zone name. If you have a PPG defined, it will not only show the name of the PPG, but also the VMs that are also associated to the same PPG. And then it starts to check for a number of check IDs. So every single check now has a unique check ID. That means it's also easier to find what we are actually doing in the backend, because you can search for it in the JSON file. And so we start by, for example, having HANA asking for the file system performance. So you can see here is an error. I'm not satisfying the 400 megabytes per second on HANA data. I only can do 200. So here is an error. And there is also a link to the Microsoft documentation on how to configure storage correct.
Including SAP notes, right? If
yes, correct. And also the SAP notes where they are relevant. Then I'm checking for the disk type. So if all the disks are actually the same disk type, we had scenarios where by accident a wrong disk type was chosen for one of the disks. And if you do striping, then the whole stripe was basically as slow as the slowest disk in this case. And that not only applies to the disk type, but also to the disk performance. So in Azure, you can now say, for example, I have a P30, but I wanted to have the performance of a P40 or a P50 during migrations. So it also checks that. For write accelerator, log files, you can see it's also looking there. Then some things like the load balancer. In Azure cases, when you use HANA with load balancers, it's expecting 0 for the TCP timestamp. Here is the SAP node. Just click on it and you go there. Then it checks whether the VM is supported at all for SAP on Azure cases, not HANA. Then it checks the HANA case, so OLTP, OLAP, scale out, and so on. And then if the OS to DB combination is supported. So as an example, one case that I had was a customer suddenly was running SUSE Linux and Oracle because he did that on premise. Now that's not supported on Azure, so it's also checking that. And then it's, for example, here starts to do the HDB HA checks, so HANA HA checks, including things like soft doc check, whether the modules are loaded, load balancer. And we also included new feature, which is checking certain kernel versions for known bugs. And I got 2 examples here. One of them was, there was a time where HANA 12.4, 12.5, 15 had problems with HANA backup failing with a checksum error. And that applied until this kernel version. And I'm checking the existing kernel version or the running kernel version again, against the one that fixed the issue. And here's the SAP link to it. And then there is an issue that we know with SUSE kernel running versions smaller than 5. We know that in certain scenarios where you have a very high throughput, for example, then you can set these parameters in the kernel boot lines, and it will avoid a scenario. There's a SUSE link already to that isn't included in the report yet, but it will be there in the next days. So the cool thing now is that if customers run it on a regular basis, they can check whether something changed for best practice settings, or if we found additional errors or checks that might influence the performance of the customer. So, if you can avoid a scenario where you have a high network load and then a CPU lockup, and it is already a known issue with SUSE, then you can do that in the maintenance window and avoid a potential downtime in the future.
Yeah, Philipp, because you're saying I can run this multiple times or throughout my whole operation. Obviously, or I guess you are updating a database or a table where, for example, a new check would come in that from correct. A certain kernel version. So does it mean when I run it, I probably should clone the latest version from GitHub, or is there an online lookup which probably does not work because my SAP system is probably closed down? So what would be the way to do this then on a regular basis? Yeah, two possibilities. The one thing, you can on the one side start a GitHub repo, then you will get notifications on all the pull requests and merges. The second thing is clone the repo.
And the third thing is there will be an auto check included, which doesn't
cool.
fail if there is no internet connection. So, you know, from your jump box or your local PC where you can access the SAP system and you can access Azure, because you will need internet access to access Azure in this case, you might be able, or there's a high chance that you can actually get a test file or a version file from the internet, and it will basically say, yeah, that's an issue. Here is a newer version. Please run it. I also thought about running it as a PowerShell module, but sometimes customers want to run certain versions, and then it's not easy to have parallel modules installed with the same checks. And in the backend, it's a JSON file. I will show it in a second. So it's a big JSON file with all the parameters defined, and we also documented the checks on GitHub. That means on the GitHub repo, there is a list of all the checks, and we also added a date for when we added it or when we modified it. So it's not a surprise that suddenly something is there, but we thought about that when we created the documentation.
One question, Phil, regarding disk check.
Yes.
Do you have a support for INF, or you're planning to do that?
ANF is included, and great question, Goran. Sorry, Dr. Bob. So the ANF check is included. If I'm checking for file systems, and as you can see here, I'm creating a table in PowerShell which merges multiple sources. That means I'm starting with a DF, then I'm collecting the VM information, taking the disk type, the performance, and so on, and calculating the performance of the certain volume. Now, if that is an NFS share for HANA, so if the HANA data, for example, is lying on an NFS share, I'm automatically adding the ANF checks.
And also, the little bit different question, are you then testing also Azure Files, NFS?
As soon as everything is GA, and if we have certain parameters, we'll add it. So we are in close sync with the product group. Whenever we have a new finding, we basically have an internal process that is a feedback loop where we then add things to the quality check.
Super, great.
Yeah, and attached at the end, as an example here, we are also putting things in like CRM configure show or CRM status. Now that is SUSE in this case. For Red Hat, it's different commands. So depending on the operating system, it will then run different commands.
That's my fault, right?
Sorry?
That's my fault to push you to add those kind of stuff.
Yeah, could be. No. So let's have a look at one of the checks. So there are two checks basically. One is operating system check and one is a PowerShell command. It's super important to say we are not installing or requiring any software on the SAP system. So the only thing we do is we are connecting using PS Remote to Windows, or we are connecting using SSH with Linux. And then we are executing certain commands, which are all query only. And then we take the output and analyze it on the host running the script. That means where you start the PowerShell script. That was one of our big design considerations. And if we have a look at, for example, an easy one. So the check here is called ASCS HA Red Hat 0005. It's checking for fence KDUM. So one of the things we added in one of the last documentation updates is you can now have an additional fencing device called fence KDUM. And the fence KDUM device is about writing a dump before actually switching over. And it's running on Red Hat only. So if there is SUSE or Red Hat, then it's basically both here. Here's just Red Hat. It's all operating system versions. It's running on the ASCS instance for all of these databases. It's an info category. That means it's not an error. It's not a hard requirement to have that in place. It's optional. The expected result here is 1. So I'm checking the number of lines where fence KDAP is in there. There is a documentation link and whether it requires, for example, which HA scenario. Now let's go to another one where we, for example, check for let's take an ANF one, as Robert already asked. So here is an ANF check. The command here is sysctl netcore rmm -n. So it's just displaying the value. I'm expecting that value, which is 16 megabytes. It applies to SUSE and Red Hat, all operating system versions on VMs and HLIs. It's only for certain storage types, so we do not require that parameter if you're not running ANF with HANA on Azure. So that's basically the answer to Robert's question. It applies to AHA scenarios as well as non-AHA scenarios. That means if you're running a scale-up system without HA, I'm checking it because here's the parameter false. And if you're running HA, then I'm also checking it because it's true. And it applies to SBD and fencing agent. So as you know, we have different options to run HA scenarios. And by defining these parameters, it's super easy to say this check only applies to a certain scenario.
Great.
And it's really, and it's, I mean, it's even readable. I mean, it totally makes sense what you just said. So I'm just thinking, if I'm running a huge SAP or even a small SAP on Azure and I stumble across something, then potentially I could even come up with such a check that is maybe very specific for my requirements. Maybe I could even check it in back to GitHub so that others can also benefit from it.
Yeah,
because
and that's what we are looking for. So we are looking for the community to contribute and give feedback on what they actually think is a good idea. So of course we are looking at what is officially supported, but I don't know, one feedback from a colleague was, hey, I had that issue with a customer that was running, I think he was running 256 gigabytes of swap space with a HANA database, which caused an issue of high swap. And you should only configure 2 gigabytes of swap with HANA. So something we added simply because we said, okay, it is a community feedback. I think we don't have a guidance on the documentation page where we say you should have 2 gigabytes of swap space, because we simply say you need to follow the SAP guidance. But make it easier and add it to the quality check is something that was super important to us.
Yeah.
I think you know, Philipp, SAP support would like you, and you already have SAP colors in your HTML report, so everything is prepared.
It's not an SAP color, no. But I'm actually talking to, and I got feedback from SAP Max Attention team where they say, yeah, that's actually a cool idea to have a fast check when you have an issue. And just imagine a customer having an issue opening up a support ticket. If he just runs quality check and there was an HA error and it just comes up with 5 recommendations and the links to the documentation, I think the turnaround time for customers can be much faster.
Yeah, just sending this or attaching this report to the ticket that I'm creating, then also the person working on the ticket has a perfect overview of what is already working, what he knows is okay, what he knows is not okay, and then he can work on that. So I think that's already a huge thing to speed up.
Yeah, correct.
And there are a few escalations which were solved through this tool already.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's really cool if a customer, they have a pain because of an escalation, an unforced HANA database failover, and running the script showed immediately that, for example, one thing that happened, it was a manual human error. There is a value that needs to be set to 30,000, which is the corosync token parameter. And by accident, they forgot 1 0 on one node. So node 1 was running fine, node 2 had an issue.
Finding the
And-
needle in the haystack.
Yeah, correct. So in the past, we basically took SUSE support configs or Red Hat collects and went through the files manually to check if all the parameters were actually set correct. Now, that took a long time. And having a script that simply runs it and does it is super easy.
Yeah.
Philip, one question. Is there any plan to I don't know, integrate that with for example, log analytics to track history? You know, you have yesterday one issue, today you don't, you fix it. You know that you have the log of what you changed there.
So there is a plan to integrate it with SAP, also with Azure.
Okay.
There is a initiative going on where we will integrate the quality check checks into SAP on Azure scenarios. But Holger would probably be the one that could say I can talk about it or not.
I'm hovering over the mute button just to be clear. I think we plan to do a lot of things in this area.
We plan to do a lot of things there, and yeah, there is an idea of integrating it with Azure.
Okay, great.
I mean, the fact anybody who troubleshoot something like this, very often comes to the point some best practices on some level were not executed properly, and to go through that forest from top to down, it's huge effort. It's really huge effort, and therefore such kind of tool, it's extremely helpful.
I had one customer scenario where we also used Quality Check as a stage gate when we did the SAP migration. So they were using their own automation using Terraform and Ansible, a similar thing like our automation that Chemo does, and they were using ANF. Now, what happened is the ANF parameters were inserted to the files correctly for the sysctl parameters, but by accident, they didn't have a carriage return at the end of the line. So suddenly all the parameters were in one line, which wasn't understood when sysctl was loading them. Now, you could say they did everything right, but the problem was within the automation that a carriage return was missing. And running Quality Check as a stage gate, when you say, okay, now I'm finished, I have everything installed, I'm just checking whether I did everything correct, if I followed Microsoft best practice, then it's super easy and it's done within 5 minutes.
Okay, good point, good example. Yeah.
So let's go through an example here. I as you can see, I have my different profiles here. I'm testing against SUSE, Red Hat, and so on with multi-disk support. That means HANA data is split through multiple disks instead of having one file system. So let's go for my SUSE HA scenario where I showed you the report just a second ago. At the moment, as you can see, it's a PowerShell script. And I also want to talk about the future. So what we are thinking about at the moment is PowerShell can also run GUIs. And we will create a GUI for this experience. That means you can just start the script. It will come up with a GUI where you enter all your parameters, press the run button, and in the backend, the script will automatically take the right ones and yeah, do it. Then
but
it checks
for run the script as well, right? Because
yes,
I
sure.
I'm really thinking of a scenario where I run this script every day, and I just to see where my system is going, whether someone messed something up or something like that.
Yeah, it is a correlation against your existing system, and yeah, that's definitely possible. So it just checked for the installed modules, and when we now go into the HTML report, you can see it's like 609, so that's 1809 in 24-hour time frame, and we can open up the report. We can check at the bottom, so it's actually the one that we just created, and now the report is done. I'll also show you another one. So here is my multi-volume example where a lot of things are messed up because I'm simply doing it intentionally, running an E16 instance. So it says basically, hey, your OSDB combination is not supported at all. It's not supported for HANA workloads. You didn't have write accelerator enabled, and so on and so forth. I don't have a swap space. In this case, I have 0 gigabytes of swap space, and FSTrim is still enabled as an example. So super easy, run within a minute when everything is set up, and the setup shouldn't be the big problem. You just require PowerShell 7.1, 7.2. Then you install the PowerShell modules for Azure, so the AC and Posh SSH, which is a great SSH library, and then you log on to Azure, and that's basically it. And everything is documented on the GitHub repo. So as you can see here, the quality check, it's basically run on your jump host, connecting to your SAP system and connecting to Azure Resource Manager. And it's, here are the links to the PowerShell installation files. Then you install the modules. You set the execution policy. That will go away as we are looking to sign the script with a Microsoft certificate, connect to the Azure account, select your correct subscription, clone the GitHub repo, download the files or a zip file, and then you just run the quality check, and that's basically it.
Good.
And here are all the checks documented.
So basically everyone who's listening or watching should just perform these steps and see if their SAP system is in a good state.
Yeah, and if you have any issues, reach out on LinkedIn, reach out and open up a GitHub issue, for example, and we'll definitely have a look. If you have ideas, if you find errors, just let me know. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool.
Cool stuff.
Philipp, I think that was amazing. I think that the check tool that we saw a year ago or something like that was already a really, really great start, but it really looks like you have perfected this one. And I know that we'll have a good future looking at this tool and with lots of ways how customers can easily consume it. But it's really fantastic.
Great. Super.
Okay, great. Then I think with that we can close early today, which is great. Very condensed, very informative session. Thank you, Philipp, and I'll get back to you. We will definitely have you on the show sooner than in a year from now.
Sure. Always happy to join you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.